Commanders. We're here talking the Atlanta Falcons and the Washington Commanders. Kickoff on Sunday. Let's get it on. What's up, everybody? Thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday afternoon, I guess. 1 o'clock. Nice little weekend coming up with Thanksgiving, a little pre-Thanksgiving podcast here today. I'm joined with my guy, Kevin Knight from SB Nation's Falcoholics content group. How you doing today, bro?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks for having me on. And how are you?
I'm doing very well, man. Looking forward to this football game. Looking forward to eating and football. Like, Thanksgiving is like my favorite holiday, honestly. Just like eat, sit back, and relax. It's awesome. So I love it. So Kevin's definitely. I'm thankful that he's here today. He's a Falcons reporter for the Falcoholic, which is part of the SB Nation group. He's the host and producer of Falcoholic Live and the Falcoholic podcast. So he's definitely going to educate us today on the Atlanta Falcons. So. Kevin, man, pretty big matchup. So it's kind of funny. I feel like Washington and Atlanta are kind of like coming out of nowhere, right? 6-5, 5-6, kind of in the mix with the playoffs coming up. So, the Falcons 5-6 last week. They beat the Chicago Bears in a pretty exciting game. I watched it prior to this, this podcast. Like, what's the state of the mind for the actual Falcons right now? What's the state of the franchise?
I think a lot of fans are very hopeful. And it's been sort of this. There's like two different groups. One that thinks that the Falcons are sort of playing way above where they are and that it's only a matter of time until they fall out of contention. And another group that's like, no, we're going to do it. Like it's good. Definitely complicated with Kyle Pitts going on IR. They didn't necessarily, he wasn't necessarily a high volume target. This is not a high volume passing game to begin with, but losing that is huge. So that definitely dampens my spirits a little bit, but you're absolutely right. Especially in the NFC South, which is pretty much the opposite of the NFC East. The Falcons are a half game out of first place in the NFC South.
I saw that.
At 5-6. So meanwhile, the Commanders 6-5, currently out of the playoff picture because of the Giants at 7-3 and the Eagles, of course, at the top. But these two teams definitely, it's a crucial matchup for both, right? Because the Falcons need to keep pace with the Bucks, who I think we all believe are going to start winning games at some point. And the Commanders have a golden opportunity to make the playoffs here in the NFC, where the wild card race is completely wide open, and the Giants could potentially be sort of coming back to earth. We know how hurt they are in the wide receiver core and on the offensive line. So big game for both teams this week.
Yeah, 100%. It's so funny how like everybody across the NFC is kind of expecting the giant downfall, and I hope it actually comes to fruition. That'd be great. So talking about the Falcons, so is this kind of a year ahead of ahead of expectations for you guys, or what are you thinking? Like, how do you feel about the team so far? Because I feel like you guys are overachieving this year.
Yeah, it's sort of been all over the place. It seemed like the national landscape was more that the Falcons were like going to be the worst team in the NFC. I know USA Today infamously predicted like a 2-15 record for the Falcons, which that was always too low. But last year they overachieved at 7-10. That was a worse roster. But they had an incredibly easy schedule, and they just crushed the one-score games last year en route to that 7-10. But they finished 7-10 with like a minus like 150 point differential. So like they were not a good team.
Yeah.
This year they're much better. It's a much better team. They're much closer to like a 500 quality team. But the schedule's been tougher. And they've had some bad luck with injuries this year. They were missing AJ Terrell for 4 weeks, I believe, and during that time they became the NFL's worst pass defense. They weren't great before it, but certainly while he was gone, it was bad. They did get him back, but they're about where I expected them to be at this point. I predicted a 6-11 finish, so they're it looks like they were probably going to overachieve that by a win or two. We'll see how it goes, but I think they've certainly been better than most of the national media certainly would have predicted so far.
I agree. Going into the season, that kind of like, the perspective from DC was Atlanta was a complete rebuild. They're going to have Mariota as a placeholder, potentially top 5 pick, and they're not really doing that right now, which is very interesting. Let me take a moment. There's some people in the chat. Just want to say what's up. What's up to Awesomeness Sports? Good to see you, bro. Thank you for jumping on. Kevin, I also got a question for you. We're gonna deep dive into this, but my guy Darius has a question for you. Before we get into it, like, how does Atlanta feel about Washington's defense so far this year? Have you guys deep dived in it yet?
I've looked into it. It's a bad matchup for the Falcons. The Falcons have really struggled against teams that are good at stopping the run. Washington's great at that. They're also they've struggled against teams with really strong front sevens in general. Washington obviously has a fantastic front seven. Daron Payne is like at the top of the free agent wish list for most Falcons fans
for every
next year.
For every group of Bears want them to. I can hear that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the Falcons have blocked the run extremely well. They've managed to do a great job there, and that's been a really huge turnaround because last year this was the 31st ranked rushing attack in the NFL. Now they're in the top 5.
Yeah.
So that's been a big change, but the problem is that the passing game is so limited, and especially against good pass rushes, that the offensive line can block the run, great, but they're not good at pass protection, and they've been. Marcus Mariota is a limited passer. He does offer you the ground attack stuff, right? He's very athletic. He's able to escape pressure. He's made some good plays, but the passing game with him is extremely limited. And without Kyle Pitts now, it's especially bad. So, yeah, I'm not looking forward to this defensive matchup. I think Washington certainly, on paper, should be favored on the defensive side of the ball, but Arthur Smith is good at and this team in general is good at keeping it close. So if they can find a way to try to overcome some of that, if they can find a way to move the ball on the ground despite playing a really good run defense, that's going to be their ticket.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. And then Nosebleed Seats Man says the Commanders finished their drives. It's a wrap. Unfortunately, they settle for field goals too much. It's going to be interesting, Kevin. I'll be honest with you. I think it's going to be a very close matchup. I feel like both teams are kind of mirroring each other a little bit. I do think our run defense is pretty strong, and that's going to kind of lend itself very well. I am curious if Marcus Mariota can create on the ground because he is kind of frisky. He does kind of have that run escapability. But you're saying that the offensive line is poor at pass blocking. Is what you're saying for Atlanta?
Yeah, that's been their weakness. Yeah, Chris Lindstrom obviously at right guard. He's the number one
doing a really
guard
good job.
To PFF. Yeah. Jake Matthews has always been good, and Caleb McGarry at right tackle is having a career year and a contract year, as many offensive linemen seem to do. But the center position has been a liability in the passing game, and then at left guard they've had to rotate a bunch of guys there. They had Elijah Wilkinson come in free agency. He really stabilized that spot after they had Jalen Mayfield, the rookie last year, who was like maybe the worst guard in football. He's been on IR now for several weeks, and they've really tried a lot of things. They tried Matt Hennessy, who was last year's center at guard, and he was having a good game and then got hurt, and now he's on IR. So they went to Colby Gossett. He didn't have a great game, so they went to Chuma Edoga, who they signed as a tackle just before the season, and he had a solid game last week, but left guard is definitely a problem spot, and so is center, and that just makes me very nervous against, like you said, Daron Payne, John Allen, and a potentially even healthier Washington front seven now with Chase Young maybe coming back this week.
100%. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So in that regard, I do think Washington does have the advantage. So we'll see. We'll talk strategy throughout the game, but yeah, Daron Payne and John Allen, obviously I want to be as objective as possible, but they're doing exceptional this year. They have 6.5 sacks for both of them. I think they're the rated the top 2 defensive tackles in the entire NFL, like as a pair. And they exploited people. They exploit people every week. And, Daron Payne's hungry because he's in a contract here. He wants to be doing better. So I do see him happening here, having a good game. Real quick, Kevin, before we start diving into like coaches and offensive strategy, I've noticed that Atlanta is very, very run heavy, right? So 3rd ranked run offense in the entire league. Let me actually go to the next slide over here. I believe you guys run on, let me take 51%. It's actually a pretty balanced ratio. But, what's the story behind that? Why does Atlanta run so well? Is it just strength of the team? Is it more of like a fear of Mariota? Or like what's the big picture there? I don't want to criticize.
I mean, you're not wrong there. Mariota, he has a group of fans that it may be the most strong fan base of any quarterback I've ever seen.
That's how Heineke is in Washington. We'll talk about that in a second too. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I respect those people a lot, but they are just, you got to be careful because if you slander Mariota, they will come for you. But
it's called a Heineke hive here in DC.
I love Heineke. Mariota mommies.
Is that what it is? I love that. That's awesome. I love that. It's fantastic.
But I mean, it's Mariota's very difficult to evaluate because every single game he'll have some wow throws, and
Mm-hmm.
you know what he can do on the ground with his legs.
Mm-hmm.
And under chaotic situations, like early in the season, they were having a lot of snap issues, and he would just get these snaps off the ground and manage to turn it into a positive play so often. Um, you see all those plays and you understand why he has a big fan base, but then the accuracy, like down to down, is just very inconsistent. The deep passing game has been pretty poor.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he has managed to keep the interceptions at a manageable level, and I think his ability to run is certainly something that is in his favor. But you look at like Kyle Pitts, for example, he's obviously not a factor anymore at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible he may come back at some point this year. Nobody seems to know what the injury is, but
Yeah, people said I heard torn MCL.
yes,
That's
torn
the story.
MCL. And then yesterday we heard grade 2 MCL sprain was the second
Mm,
opinion, which would
okay.
not be season ending. But I mean, if they're not in the playoff hunt in week 17 or whatever it is, then it's essentially season ending. So, um, but they're over 30% of Kyle Pitt's targets this year were considered uncatchable or off target. So
Wow.
he's had 60 targets, only caught about 28 of them, and 30% of those even were just not catchable targets. So the Falcons have the weapons now. Drake London has been one of the best rookie
Yeah,
wide receivers. I feel like if they had,
I loved him. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like if they had more of a passing game, we'd be talking about him as the best potentially. I mean, no slander to Chris Olave, even though he's a saint. He's
Yeah.
been playing great, but so it's just been so limited. The volume is so low and the accuracy so scattershot that the passing game is very unreliable, to say the least. It's very limited, and I think it's intentional that they limit the passing attempts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's tough because the Falcons early in the season were having success running against stack boxes. They were sort of defying the odds there, but as with all stats, we know running against stacked boxes doesn't generally produce great rushing efficiency,
Returns.
and it's started
Exactly.
to come
Mm-hmm.
back to
Mm-hmm.
earth here. And now without Kyle Pitts, you just really wonder, is teams are just going to stack the box now, and can Mariota and the passing game do enough to lighten that up or keep the offense moving? And thus far, when they've had trouble running the ball, it's basically been game over for this team. So it's definitely a product of, like, they're good at running, so they want to do it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the passing game is very limited, I guess, is maybe the nice way to say it.
I got you. So I'm interested by that. So obviously Kyle Pitts was like, he was kind of crowned as like the unicorn coming out of the draft, like, the height, weight, speed guy, excellent wide receiver. He's a wide receiver in a tight end's body. So I guess I heard from the national perspective, they were using him more as a blocker this year, and they weren't really like implementing him more in the pass game. Is that true, or or is more the inaccuracies? You would attest to that?
I mean, they are definitely asking him to block,
Yeah.
and I think it's good for his development. I think it's always good for tight ends to be able to block. He's actually been about an average NFL blocker after his rookie season, where he was very ineffective. This year, he's someone who's effective as a blocker, and the Falcons expect every player on the field to block on run plays.
Yeah, I heard about that actually.
So it's that's not a bad thing, but it's sort of, I think, both and, right? Like, I think it's good to develop him as a blocker, but also the passing game is extremely low volume, and the targets he is getting frequently are not catchable. So it looks, I think, a lot worse, but
It kind of
he's
compiles
getting
on each other.
targeted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think he's getting targeted at the like, I think he was either 1 or 2 in targets with Drake London, the other guy. So he's being targeted and used as a receiver, but the passing game already, I mean, they're 31st in attempts. So there's not a lot of volume to go around anyway. And when 30% of those are off target, he's just not going to have a lot of production. But I know some people were like, "Oh, is he a bust or whatever?" Like, you saw what he did last year with with Matt Ryan.
Yeah.
Over 1,000 yards as a rookie tight end. There's only one other tight end that's ever done that before. We know what he is as a receiver. This is not the Falcons' long-term plan. This is we're trying to, like, win some games this year with an offense that, to Arthur Smith's credit, has been effective. This is the 12th highest scoring offense with Marcus Mariota at quarterback.
Yeah, like 23 and a half points. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys like Arthur Smith out there? Do you guys like him as a coach? Because he's been there for a while now, right?
This is his second season.
Oh, second season. I thought, okay, I made a mistake. Go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, so 2021 was his first year. Obviously a rough year. But he overachieved last year, according to a lot of folks as well, right? 7-10 with that, minus 150 point differential or whatever it ended up being.
Yeah.
But I think offensively, he's good at at scheming up what he has.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, the passing game is limited, so we're not really seeing a lot there. But I think he's done a good job of especially in the red zone. That was always his calling card in Tennessee. You know, he helmed the #1 red zone offense 2 years in a row there.
Mm-hmm.
The red zone offense here is good as well, but it's tough to like get a full read on it. I mean, I think he and Terry Fontenot, the general manager, are doing a great job of setting this team up. I think it's hard to do a full evaluation with a limited quarterback situation, and with the roster in this shape. The Falcons are dealing with the most dead cap in NFL history right now, $77
Matt Ryan,
million.
right? Yeah.
Yep, and several other moves, including Julio Jones. They're still paying that off.
How long is that going for? A couple more years, or
nope? It'll be over after this year. So that's
wow. Okay.
So that's
great.
the good news is it's over after this year. But this year they had to bite the bullet. They built this roster with like roughly 60% of the salary cap. So you know, when you put it in that context, it's like, oh, you know, being frisky for the playoffs at this point in the season, that's great with only 60% of the salary cap. But it kind of clouds the full evaluation, because you know this is, I mean, when people were saying this is a bottom 5 team, like calling it a bottom 5 roster is not inaccurate, but they've managed to play above that level, I think in part because of the coaching and Arthur Smith sort of extracting more out of this offense than you would expect. But it is very limited, and there's certainly more evaluation to be done, and we need to see like what the full plan is, because again, if Kyle Pitts is just here to block, why didn't you just take a blocking tight end, you know, and that sort of thing? Drake London, you spent now back-to-back first-round picks on pass catchers. You have to believe that this run, it's always going to be a more balanced offense. That's what he ran at Tennessee too, and I think that's what he wants, is to have, you know, a complementary offense. But I think going forward, he probably wants more of like a 60-40 split, which is already like, that's already run heavy in today's NFL.
Yeah, it's really heavy.
Yeah. So right now it's 51 run. So like
and that feels like a lot for some reason, right? It's kind of crazy.
Oh, I know that today's NFL, that's like the #2 most rushing attempts in the NFL. But I think they'd probably rather pass the ball at like a 60% rate.
Yeah.
But right now it's like it's so limited, it's under 50% passing. So it complicated evaluation certainly, but I think that this year we've seen the running game really come into play, and that is something that is very important for Smith and for his offense. We haven't seen the play action pass game take off, because that is the part that's been missing from this offense, and the part that's been missing from Tennessee's offense since he left as well, is that really deadly play action pass game that is not necessarily high volume but is very efficient. They've tried to make that work, but like again, the deep passing game is just so inconsistent that they need to hit these shots, and like Kyle Pitts is running wide open downfield, and just it's not even in his zip code and stuff like that. So I think the personnel are in place for this to happen, and that gives me faith for the future. But at this point, it's very much a work in progress. So I like Arthur Smith. That's a very long-winded way of answering your question.
No, I love that. It's very, very educational. I love that. So that's great. It's first of all, it sounds like it's going to be a very low scoring game. I feel like Washington does a great job stopping the run. They've been kind of short things up. We had a pretty big free agent acquisition, William Jackson III. He's supposed to be a man, he was known for being a man cover corner from Cincinnati, coming over to Washington. Wasn't a good fit. We gave up big plays early on in the season, but since then our defense has been very stout, so I don't really see any big plays happening. I know Drake London's a target hound. He's gonna catch it over and over again. I don't really see him as more of a burner, though. He's not really a deep time, that deep threat. Would you say, is that fair? Is that accurate to say, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, Drake London is sort of he's very well
Mike
rounded.
Evans type, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like he's more of a Mike Evans, and Mike Evans is still dangerous downfield. He's not a
100%.
burner,
yeah,
but fast enough at that size certainly to cause problems. That's not really been his utilization so far so much. He's been more of the intermediate pass catcher, and then he uses his yards after catch ability, his ability to break tackles to get those big plays. Kyle Pitts was definitely the guy they wanted to go to deep a lot, and then Damiere Byrd has come on recently as sort of Mariota's preferred deep target, the one that he's seemed to have a connection with. And Bird's a speedster who I think has played well, but again, it's just so inconsistent, and of course, going against a great pass rush is going to make that difficult as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I guess one more question, kind of focusing on the offense, or two more questions actually. So I don't know how heavy-handed he is in your organization, but we actually had Kyle Smith as one of our wonder kids in our franchise, kind of going up and coming and becoming a general. We were hoping he'll be our general manager here. Does he have a heavy hand in Atlanta? Is he part of the whole draft process? And how do you guys feel about him?
Yeah, I think he's one of the key scouting staff. Like, I think he's in charge more or less of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've never personally met him because I actually live in upstate New York, so I'm only really down there for training camp. So
Okay.
I've actually haven't met Kyle Smith, but I know he's well liked in the organization, very
Mm-hmm.
well respected, and I think he runs a lot of their scouting stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think based on the last couple draft classes that he's been there for, I think it started in 2021 and 2022 here as well. I think we're seeing that these are long-term focused draft classes. People were sort of disappointed in 2021s at first, but now we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing multiple starters emerge from that class, and a lot of those guys really start to play well. So, yeah, I think he's doing great here, and it wouldn't shock me if he does eventually graduate to the GM's chair.
Yeah, we loved him here. I think he was our SEC guy. He was the southeastern part of the United States. So, he's responsible for Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen. He basically added those to our team. So I can definitely see Kyle Smith thriving there. One more question before we pivot to defense. So I guess I got two questions. So first of all, Marcus Mariota, long-term perspectives in Atlanta. What do you guys? What are your thoughts on that?
He's technically under contract next year. It's sort of a
Okay.
team option year, effectively,
Mm-hmm.
where they have the ability to keep him at about 16.5 million, which of course is a bargain for starting
Yeah,
quarterback.
yeah.
They can also cut him and save almost all of it. I think they
Wow,
save like over 12 of that
they're in
amount.
a good spot.
So they have flexibility there. I don't expect him to be the preferred option, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
They may wait to see if they need to keep him. They may. I do expect them to go to Desmond Ritter at some point. My
Mm.
prediction has been as soon as they lose the next game, we could see Ritter. Because
Out
especially
of the
if the
playoff hunt.
losses, yeah,
Yeah.
especially if the
Mm-hmm.
losses combine with the Bucks win, it's
Yeah.
just you're gonna have a really hard time climbing back in when you're multiple games behind the Bucks. And this team, they're frisky, but I don't really think they're a playoff contender in like the usual sense of the word.
Yeah.
So I think we will see Ritter soon. I don't think Mariota's future is probably in Atlanta. But we don't really know what the future is next year at quarterback either. Obviously, if Ritter comes in and looks great, then you're feeling good about that. But I do think the Falcons will be aggressive in addressing quarterback if Ritter isn't the option that they want to go with.
Mm-hmm.
My pet theory now is Lamar Jackson. If
That'd be
he ever
fun.
leaves,
That'd be
yeah,
fun.
because
Really cool.
you can't imagine a better fit for Lamar than Atlanta's offense.
Yeah.
He's
On offense, makes a lot
basically
of sense.
the S plus version of Mariota, I would say. So,
Hundred
um,
percent, 100%.
so that would be fun. But yeah,
What are the early returns on Desmond Ritter? Like, he was actually a hot topic around here too. Did he look good in camp? Is he getting any reps right now in practice? Like, what are you hearing about him?
Arthur Smith keeps downplaying the fact that there's any situation, which usually when that happens means that the situation is very close to happening.
Exactly, 100%. They always lie, 100%.
But in training camp, it was interesting how they structured it. Basically, they would have them run like mirror drills that they
Hmm.
basically the two of them would go through the same drills with the same receivers, just
Yeah.
switching off. In the preseason, everyone knows if you watch Falcons preseason, he won the first preseason game on like a fourth down touchdown. That was like a miracle play. So that, of course, jazzed everyone up.
Endeared him. Yeah, everyone loves him. Yeah,
And he
gotcha.
had a strong preseason in general. So, and this is a guy that most, I think, considered maybe the most pro-ready quarterback. So it's
Yeah.
kind of funny to watch all these quarterback changes happening. We're hearing about even Zach Wilson getting benched today, Davis Mills getting benched, and then the Falcons not turning to Ritter yet. They have a plan for him, I believe. They've made that clear that they're not going to go away from their plan, but I do think the plan is for him to play soon.
Mhm.
Probably after the bye at the latest. If they win out going into the bye, which honestly, I'm not expecting. There's a
Couple more
chance
weeks?
that yeah, that would be 2 more weeks. So it would be the
Okay.
Commanders game, and then they play Pittsburgh at home after that.
Okay.
So if they beat the Commanders, then it's maybe much more of a possibility. But I'm not necessarily expecting that. So I think we will see him probably for the last 4 games at minimum. And then we'll have to go from there. But I loved him. I had him as quarterback 2 behind Malik Willis. in terms of long-term projection. But
high upside with Willis, I understand.
Yeah. But in terms of like playing immediately, I do think Ritter's probably going to look a lot better than Malik Willis did when he got a chance to play. So we'll just see. But I definitely really liked him. And I think that he's got a chance certainly to have a sort of Dak Prescott like transition to the NFL.
Same build. Yeah, I can see that.
And that it's rare to see that happen with third round quarterbacks, but this was an odd draft for quarterbacks.
Very odd draft.
You don't always, those stats aren't always super meaningful, particularly when only one quarterback goes before the third round in the first place. So
exactly right. It was an outlier season. We're kind of in the same ballpark too. To give you some context, we have Taylor Heineke overachieving for us right now. He started for us last year as Ryan Fitzpatrick went down, started 16 games for us. He wins. It's kind of crazy how this happened for us. Like there's clear limitations. You're going to watch the game. There's going to be some times where he throws the ball and it's going to be like a cherry pick ball thrown right to your defender. And if you take advantage of it, it might change the whole course of the game. To be honest with you, He has that capability, but he also is just very, he runs away. He escapes. He can, get the ball on third downs. And, we don't know what his long-term projections are going to be either. We had Carson Wentz. We traded a third-round pick for him. We were hoping that he would be a starter for us, but from a Washington perspective, he's completely immobile. He can't run at all. He has a great arm talent, but our offensive line is pretty weak, and it's a good talking point when we pivot to defense in a moment. But our offensive line is pretty weak, so we typically have to run the ball, kind of hide the offensive line, and just be efficient with Heineke is what we're going for. I think we are playoff pushing right now. I think we have that perspective with our coaching mindset, but we do have Sam Howell in the wings just in case if things completely fall apart, we can kind of see them develop. So it's kind of funny that our quarterbacks are kind of parallel in that regard. So that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And Sam Howell's another guy probably should have gone before he was drafted too. So
you got him in the 5th round. So last question, I keep saying last question, but for offense, is Cordell Patterson that's the name of the game? That's the guy to keep an eye on for Atlanta?
They've really found success with all of their running backs for the most part.
I've seen Algier too, yeah.
Yeah, Patterson is the dynamic one. He's the bell cow, so to speak. He did miss some time with injury, but he's very dangerous. He finally broke the kickoff return record last week.
Changed the whole game.
Yep, and that was huge. And he's just incredibly dynamic, and he's really become the Derrick Henry of this offense. You see him run. You see him on the kickoff returns. You're like, oh, this dude's just lightning quick. But then you see him play running back, and he just smashes into guys and bowls people over. I
can't think of the top of my head. Is he pretty big?
Yeah, he's not quite Henry, but he's like 6'2", 220 plus. So
okay, I didn't realize
he's
that.
Big.
Okay.
He's big. They've gotten a lot out of rookie Tyler Algier, who's really become their third down back as well, and done some good things with the ball in his hands as a receiver. They also undrafted free agent Caleb Huntley has really come on strong as sort of their change of pace guy. They leaned on him a lot when Patterson went out, and all of these guys, like every single one of their running backs, over 10 carries right now, and Mariota.
I think I have it on here too. I can pull it up.
Yeah, all of them have over 4.5 yards per carry. So they're running the ball very effectively with all these guys. I think it's the first time in franchise history they've had 4 runners over. Well, I think if they get to 400 for all of those guys, so Algier, Patterson, Mariota, and Huntley, that would be the first time ever in franchise history that they've had 4 400-yard rushers, and it seems pretty likely at this point because they don't have very far to go. But with Patterson healthy, he's the top guy. Algier's gonna rotate in, and then Caleb Huntley, if they need to give people a break, Huntley is that guy as well. I mean, pretty much they've all been great. And Damian Williams was a guy we were expecting to play a significant role. He got hurt on his first carry of the season.
From Kansas City, right?
Yeah. Got hurt on his first carry of the season and is still on IR. They lost the guy that was probably expected to be their RB2, and it hasn't slowed this rushing attack down at all. So props to the coaching staff for getting all these running backs ready to go. And the run blocking, I think, has been the biggest change since last year. They've basically taken an offensive line that was more or less the same, except for left guard, and turned it from 31st to like top 5 in run blocking. So
I've heard good things about your run blocking. Like just scouting
yeah.
this week, we have a great analyst. Logan Paulson played tight end he played for the Falcons as well. He basically does radio for us now, and he does a lot of podcasts and breaks it down. And he was like, Atlanta is frisky. Their run game is pretty strong. He said Algiers a tank. He said Algiers the power running back.
They all are, honestly. Yeah.
And he basically said that the offensive line of the Falcons is more of like a big hulking, putting more of a power run offense, which is very interesting. It's gonna be really cool to see because it's strength versus strength in this game. It'd be good to see. All right, so let's pivot a little bit to our defense, right? So Atlanta, I think most of us in DC and Commanderland are familiar with all the Atlanta Falcons offensive players. The defensive players were kind of like more curious about trying to put it together. We saw Rashad Evans as a tackling machine, Grady Jarrett's, your leading sack producer as well. I guess what should Washington look out for in regard to Atlanta's defense? Are they more of like a man coverage defense, more of a zone kind of guy? Like, defensive schemes, what do you think over there?
Extremely zone heavy,
okay.
and ineffective at it, I might add. But they did get AJ Terrell back last week, and that was a big boost. But defensively, they were the worst pass defense in the NFL while AJ Terrell was gone by far. They had to start a practice squad cornerback for a lot of that time because they lost Casey Hayward, their other cornerback, at the exact same time.
Oh, wow.
And Hayward may not return this year, so we'll see. So they had to elevate Darren Hall, who was a depth guy and one of their 4th round picks last year. He's answered the call and has played well. But that spot vacated by Terrell just was a disaster. So now that Terrell's back, it should be better. They've got 2 young safeties they like, and Richie Grant, who was last year's 2nd round pick, really come on strong. And then Jalen Hawkins, 4th round pick from 2020, he's also playing well. So they have a nice young safety duo. The cornerback room, it's sketchy now. Isaiah Oliver's finally back from his injury. He had a season-ending injury last year. Came back a couple weeks ago and has finally started to sort of return to his pre-injury level of play. He's just a really dynamic blitzer and run defender.
Is Troy Anderson the linebacker that went to Montana State, like played quarterback, like every position, like running back,
quarterback,
and all that?
running back, linebacker?
Okay.
Yes.
How's he doing? I'm curious about him because we were talking about him during the draft as well.
Yeah, I was surprised he went as early as he did. I had him as like a top 100 guy.
Okay.
But he ended up going in the 2nd round of the Falcons, and they're getting him snaps every game. He's only played a little over 200 snaps, so not a starter. But every single game, PFF hates him. I feel like PFF hates all the Falcons linebackers, but you can just tell, like, he's the most athletic player on the field. And he ran down Justin Fields for a tackle for loss that we all know how difficult that is to do.
100%.
He's not a great tackler, and that's not surprising from a guy who's played linebacker for like a year and a half total. But he's just so fast, and he plays really hard, and he's starting to, I think, learn a little bit more about the position. His coverage instincts, of course, are non-existent because he's never played coverage before, but this is a guy that the sky's the limit for, and he's very exciting to watch. And the other linebacker starters would be like Rashaan Evans, who I think has played a solid season for the Falcons. He's like their thumper and has honestly played better in coverage than maybe at any point in his career.
He's from Alabama, right? Rashaan Evans from Alabama. That's what I thought. Okay, cool. Definitely. Got a question in the chat for you, bro. So from Darius Ricks, thanks again for the other question, Darius. He said, outside of Grady Jarrett, who's the best pass rusher on the Falcons?
Rookie Arnold Ebiketie. He doesn't have the sack numbers, but the pressures are really high. And he finally did get another one last week, but I think he was leading all rookie pass rushers in pressures at one point this season, despite being very limited in terms of snaps up until maybe 2-3 weeks ago. He's been really coming on. So he's definitely the other guy to watch. But yeah, it's basically Grady Jarrett on the interior. That's the only guy on the interior.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm seeing he's a linebacker, right? That Ongunde, he's a linebacker. Do you guys have a 3-4 like defense or a 4-3?
They play 3-4 for the most part. They will do some 4 pass rushing looks, and like nickel. But yeah, for the most part, you're going to see Lorenzo Carter and Ebiketie are going to be your 2 edge guys, and then Grady Jarrett, Abdullah Anderson, and then they just lost Taquan Graham, who was their only other, I would say, good interior player. Abdullah Anderson has been solid, so props to him. But they're going to be scrambling to find someone else there. Maybe it's Jalen Dalton, who's just come back off of IR. Maybe it's Matt Dickerson, who they picked up off waivers after training camp and has barely played. They just picked up Jaleel Johnson off waivers. He hasn't had a great season up to this point. So they're scrambling on the defensive interior, which was a weak spot going into training camp. Then they lost 2 players to IR in training camp, and they've continued to take losses there. So part of the reason, we mentioned they didn't have the cap space, and then they lost some of the players they did bring in. Eddie Goldman retired before the season.
Oh, geez.
Who was supposed to be their nose tackle. So it's been an interesting journey on the interior defensive line. But Grady Jarrett's there, and he doesn't seem to care that nobody else around him is doing much. So that's always someone to watch. But at least now, I think they're starting to get a framework, but they don't have the impact players. Gotcha. I think if you take a Daron Payne and put him in here, then you're starting to feel a lot better because they have the depth around to back that up. But right now it's just Grady Jarrett. So
Gotcha. It's funny. So just for the record, for the Atlanta Falcon fans that might be listening, Ron Rivera said this week that he actually is actively trying to re-sign Daron Payne. So hopefully he stays in DC, but I know you guys want him. My thing is, if he actually hits the free agent market, that's when it's game over, because you guys have a lot more money than us. The Bears have a lot of money as well. So it'll definitely be a bidding war for his services.
Oh yeah. We'll see. I mean, I think obviously you have the advantage when he's in-house. So
hopefully he likes that there. My other question for you, I guess I was asking about defensive deficiencies and where you guys are struggling. It sounds like the defensive line is your weak spot, huh? Is that fair to say? Is anywhere else to look at, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, it was when Casey Hayward and AJ Terrell were out there. It wasn't the secondary so much. When both of them went down, it definitely was the secondary. Now that Terrell's back and Darren Hall's sort of stabilizing and Isaiah Oliver's doing pretty well, I think they're fine there at corner now. But yeah, now it's right back to the front seven being problematic. The defensive interior, the pass rush in general has not been great. They've stopped the run pretty well. On an efficiency metric, in terms of yardage, they've given up a lot, but they've played a lot of the NFL's best run attacks. They held the Bears to 160 rush yards, which sounds like a lot until you look at how many yards they average. And going into Atlanta's game last week, they had, I think, put up 225 or more in each of their last 4 games or something like that. So the Falcons could stop the run. They've just really struggled to rush the passer and stop the pass. So that has generally been the key, especially with Terrell out. Now that he's back and hopefully healthy, maybe they are able to patch that up a little bit, but definitely easier to pass against this defense than run so far.
Interesting. Okay, it's interesting. It's gonna So just for the record, so if you haven't been watching or scouting too many Washington games, we obviously want to run the ball. It's been our identity with Taylor Heineke. Now we're not necessarily particularly effective with it. I actually put a tweet out earlier in the week, just looking at DVOA and Football Outsiders. I think we have a 20th or 29th adjusted line rate for our offensive line. We don't really generate a lot of push with our offensive line, but the fact of the matter is we have Antonio Gibson, who's 230 pounds. Brian Robinson is a kind of a tank kind of runner as well. They just keep the chains moving forward, right? They'll take 3 to 4 yards per carry, moving the ball forward in that regard. And we've been uber efficient, kind of sticking with it and kind of relying on our defense there. We do have Terry McLaurin, who does flip the field as a deep passer, so we can kind of talk about him in a moment if you'd like. And we have the potential, but it's going to be interesting. I think the game is kind of, in regard to strategy and game plan, it seems like it's kind of fits to what Washington wants to do. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. We'll see how that goes over there. Let's kind of pivot into that. So let's talk about the game on Sunday. What is your confidence level? How do you guys feel in Atlanta? Are you feeling pretty optimistic about it? Are you concerned, or what's the overall perception out there?
I think the matchups don't favor the Falcons really in this one. They've tended to struggle against teams that could stop the run really well, and they don't protect the passer well at all. So teams that have a really dominant defensive line, that's why the Panthers gave them so many fits. The Panthers put the hurt on them on Thursday Night Football. They should have beat them the 2 weeks before that. That was more of a shootout game, but they don't pass protect well, and if you shut down the run, the passing game is so limited that it's tough. So I don't like that matchup. Certainly, I think it's pretty tough to see them scoring a lot. But on defense, they do stop the run well, and I know Washington likes to run the ball. it's sort of like the Falcons aren't a great run defense, but if you're not passing against them, you're sort of helping them because they've been so bad against the pass.
That's so interesting.
Every
That's
run
so
play is really helping them because if you could have been passing, and that was probably way more dangerous for this team. The one area that they've been good in is creating turnovers. They've created a lot of interceptions. They've been very opportunistic there. And I know Heineke is prone to maybe a couple of those throws a game. So that's the one equalizer that I think could be there is if they are able to capitalize on some turnovers. You go back to the Thursday Night Panthers game, the Falcons lost that 25-15, but they dropped 3 interceptions that were right in their hands. And if you catch 1 or 2 of those, that could be a very different game. So the turnovers are always the great equalizer in the NFL. That's the path I could see if the Falcons can limit the run game of the Commanders. The defense, to their credit, has pretty much kept them in every game. It's really been the offense that either shows up or doesn't. You like I said, with the matchups there, I think this is one of those games where the offense is going to really struggle. But maybe the defense can pick up the slack, but I do think Washington deserves to be favored. I mean, I think they're 4.5-point favorites at this point. And no Kyle Pitts. I mean, he wasn't catching a ton of passes, but now you don't even have
threat, exactly.
Yes.
And honestly,
you can sell out now, So
he would have suited very well against our defense too. And I think our defensive line is very stout. Our safeties are actually strong. I don't know if are you familiar with Derek Forrest and Cam Curley? Hearing about all them?
I loved Forrest coming out. Yeah, he was great.
So they're coming along. So I think they are PFF's number 1 and 2 safeties across the league. If we did have a weak point, it would be our linebackers, but our linebackers are actually starting to evolve as well. We took Jamin Davis in the first round. People kind of said that he was more of a height, weight, speed guy, and we kind of reached for him. But I think he's starting to kind of settle down in the game, starting to slow for him. So I think he's starting to come and rise a little bit. But he doesn't cover well. He's more of like a run and seek kind of linebacker. So Kyle Pitts would have exploited that. What I am concerned, I think you're nailing it, is I think Washington, although we want to establish a run as our, bread and butter, we aren't uber efficient at it. And I'm afraid that our offensive coordinator can be sporadic at times. He might actually be like, throw the game plan out the book and might start throwing the ball around. And if we turn the ball over, that's when things can kind of get ugly because then you guys can control the clock and you guys can run the ball. And as you alluded to, Taylor Heineke definitely throws, he averages about 1 turnover a game. I think he has 25 turnovers in 19 games. So he definitely is susceptible to that. I guess let's talk. So. Dream scenario. What does Atlanta need to do to win the game?
They need to find a way to run the ball against Washington's defense. I don't know I don't know how that happens, but I mean, if they can figure out just a way to make it work, that's their ticket. When they've run the ball effectively, they basically win. So that's really the key. Like, find a way to successfully run the football. That's really the key, and maybe create some takeaways. I think those are really the tickets for the Falcons. Not going to be easy, but that's what they're going to have to do. Particularly, like I said, without Kyle Pitts in the building, I don't think they can expect a whole lot from the passing game. It was limited before he left, so now even more so, more and more importance being heaped on the run game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It was an added component. I don't know if you take any stock into this, but there is going to be an emotional component to the game as well. Sean Taylor is one of a fan favorite. I don't know if you're familiar with him. One of our ultimate favorite players of all time for us. They're actually dedicating a statue before the game on section 132, and I believe we're also wearing black to kind of have some emotion and some confidence in our game plan too. So we'll be juiced up. It's going to be about turnovers, and it's going to be interesting there. Do you have any questions from the Commander's perspective? Anything you guys are curious about from there?
Yeah, I mean, Chase Young activated off injured reserve back to the roster. Do you think he's playing this week, or is it going to be a wait and see sort of thing?
I think it's going to be a wait and see. From everything I've heard, all the local beat reporters are saying that it's structurally sound. His knee has been fine for a couple of weeks now, even maybe about a month or so now. But it's all about the confidence and his ability to do football moves, right? He's training before the games, he's warming up, he's been at practices, but he hasn't fully hit a 300-pound offensive lineman and try to shift it and kind of have dynamic movements as well. So I think what I've heard is that they're going to kind of slowly put him back into the defense, but more like 15 to 16 snaps per game, and ideally by the end of the year get to about 20, 25 snaps. I don't think Chase Young's ever going to be that full-time player in 2022. So it's going to be interesting because our defensive line has actually done pretty well without him. Payne and Sweat are having Payne and Allen are having career years. Montez Sweat is always a threat. He's a great edge player. I love him. Actually, he's one of my favorite players. And I think he's been kind of he has started off slow because there's only been one true edge rusher on that side. They're kind of chipping his way, but he's starting to kind of catch his own now and kind of popping a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had a pretty good game. On the opposite side, we have James Smith-Williams, we have Casey Toohill, and Efe Obada. They're kind of like a rotating kind of mixture there at defensive end. They're more of like run stoppers and more like opportunistic, but they're not like game breakers like Chase Young would be. So the talk in DC is, with the return of Chase Young, does that offer a high enough upside to break the chemistry that's going on? Because last year, we love Chase Young. He's a physical freak, but there were some chemistry issues with the whole defensive line because we have so many first rounders and a whole bunch of alpha males. They're trying to like get the sacks. They weren't working in cohesion, right? So that was the issue there. So, but on the flip side, they fired our old defensive line coach Mills. He was a Carolina guy. They got rid of him, and I think we're playing better for our current defensive line coach. So maybe kind of straighten things out, and maybe this is good for Chase. Maybe he's going to come back and be like, you know what, I'm going to play within the system. I'm going to play it right. I'm going to sell out for 15 plays, and we'll see how it goes. And our fan base will be amped up. I don't think it's not coincidental that his first home game is going to be a home game. I think it's going to be a setup that way, but we'll see if he actually plays. Like from what I get is, practice Fridays, Saturdays, kind of what to monitor. If he's practicing well on Saturday, then Sunday we'll give him a go.
Yeah, that's definitely one that's important. And then just your thoughts on Heineke versus Wentz. Do you think there's a point where Wentz comes back into the lineup, or are they pretty much out on that?
It's so interesting, right? So I think the coaches are actually intrigued. Like, this is just my intuition and reading the tea leaves. I think Ron Rivera actually likes Carson Wentz. He was actively involved in looking at the analytics and selecting Carson Wentz and making that trade. So I think he does like that high upside. He looks at he knows Taylor Heineke is limited. Like if the coaching staff was confident and loved Taylor Heineke, they wouldn't have actively pursued all these quarterbacks during the offseason, right? Like they were in the Russell Wilson, race. They were in the Aaron Rodgers race. Honestly, it ended up being better for us when it all said and done. That Russell Wilson contract's crazy, but we got Carson Wentz. I think they are intrigued by him, but I think right now there's so much momentum behind Taylor Heineke. We won 5 of 6 with him. The team loves him. I don't know if you know the stick now, like the stick actually, is that basically, whenever he wins a game, he buys Jordans for the visiting team. He's doing all that right now. He bought it for the offensive linemen 2 weeks ago. He bought it for the tight ends last week. Now some defensive players want to get some Jordans from his as well. He did the whole Kirk Cousins on the airplane when they put the chains around his neck, and they're kind of like hyping him up a little bit. So it's like if they put in Carson Wentz now, I think it would create some sort of it would create some sort of conflict in the locker room. Me being like, I think you're kind of at that mindset as well, like a draft guy, kind of a, numbers kind of guy. Like I am intrigued by having Carson Wentz potentially going back on the field because you have to give him a true assessment before you let him go. But right now, if the team's winning with Heineke, then you got to roll with it. So I think the realistic exit for Carson Wentz is basically at the end of the season. There's an out on his contract. I think, if you could choose Daron Payne or Carson Wentz, I think the team wants Daron Payne. So I think they're basically going to they'll cut Carson Wentz. He's $26 million on the cap. If they cut him, it returns all the way back to the cap, and they'll just pivot that money right to Daron Payne and offer him a deal right there. So I think that's the big picture. So I would be surprised if Carson Wentz comes back, but if we have a bad game against Atlanta, have another bad game after that, they might want to have some prospects for next year. And I think just like Desmond Ridder, I think they're trying to insulate and protect Sam Howell. It's kind of like they like him, but I don't think they view him as an immediate starter right now. They want to kind of develop him slowly, which I think is prudent. You got to do that. I mean, unless you're a top 5, top 10 pick, take your time on the quarterback and let it kind of grow. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, especially with like a 5th round pick like Howell, there's like no pressure for him to start. Like I imagine
exactly right.
There might be some rumblings in your fan base. I don't know, but
there's some.
with Ridder even being a 3rd round pick, there's been a lot of rumblings, and part of that's obviously because Mariota's limitations as a passer. But Yeah, I mean, I know Heineke seems to be well liked, so that
Mm-hmm.
certainly helps everything. And then last question isn't necessarily football related, but what do you think about the Commanders' like uniforms? Because they're very polarizing topic.
Well,
So
let me ask you. I got my opinion. I want to hear what's
yeah,
your opinion. What are your thoughts on the uniforms? To be honest, I honestly, I have thick
I don't
skin.
I like the logo. I think the
Okay.
logo is cool.
Okay.
I don't like the uniforms.
Okay.
I don't I don't jive with the numbers and like the sort of like whatever that pattern is, almost
Yeah.
like a gradient sort of thing.
Yeah. The gradient.
Um, the colors are fine. I just don't
Which
like the
do you hate
numbers.
all
Yeah.
the jerseys, or do you like anyone in particular? Or they're all kind of crappy. I don't care. To be honest with you, like which one?
I
You
I've
go
always
ahead.
been like a big fan of black jerseys, so I think I like the black ones best.
Me
But I
too.
just don't like the numbers. The numbers really throw me off. But I think the
Hmm.
colors and the logo are good. So I think it's like some tweaks away from being a good combo. But I'm interested how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I'm a
Yeah.
DMC. I'm a DMV guy, so DC, Maryland, Virginia. If you're
Mhm.
full of Georgia listeners, I live in Maryland. I've seen teams come and go. I've seen the Wizards change their logos and change their jerseys. The Ravens, they came out with that shield crest on the side of their helmets, kind of evolved over
Yep.
time. I think the Commanders jerseys will also evolve over time and change as well. Um, for me, I love the black jerseys. I know they're kind of polarizing. They're so different. In our fan base, the hardest part about this whole rebrand was there's so many different the fan base is nuanced, right? You have people that like young, old, in-state, out-of-state, international, different everything, right? So everyone. Some people wanted to kind of hold on to the history and keep that burgundy and gold, and somebody wanted to kind of move on. And I'm in my mid 30s, man. So it's like I've seen the team like for most of my life has been pretty crappy, right? Growing up, I saw some wins, saw some Super Bowls, and I was kind of up for like a new perspective. So I'm cool. I'm cool with the new things, right? I
Yeah.
think the
Yeah.
black jerseys are great. The burgundy jerseys are classic, right? Like I like them, but at the same time, it's like burgundy is cool. I mean, you can't really wear burgundy with a lot of things, But
Yeah.
then the
Yeah.
white, the white jerseys look cool on the players, but I actually have a white jersey, and I feel sensitive wearing it. Like I don't know if I like this white jersey that much, but like that's
Mhm.
kind of the perspective there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, to give you a little context, real quick, the gradient and the numbers, from what I understand, is the DC shape is kind of like a little
Oh,
diamond,
okay.
and that's
Mhm.
why they have the little diamonds inside the number right there. That's why they
I
do
see.
that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily anti-gradient. Like, I really like the Falcons red black gradients
Mhm.
that they wore last week. I
Yeah.
think that looks good, but it has like you've seen it done very poorly. Like the Jaguars did it really poorly.
Dude, your red
It's
helmets are freaking ridiculous. This is the best helmets in the
Yeah, they
league,
need to
man.
use
Yeah.
those way
Yeah, those
more.
are
Like,
awesome. They're sick, dude.
yeah,
Yeah.
they need to get those incorporated into the mix way more because that's just a great helmet. I've wanted them to go back to the all blacks for a while. Like I think the Vic era jerseys were really great. I like the new jerseys, but again, I don't like the Falcons numbers. Like I feel like
Yeah.
everyone tries to go too aggressive with the numbers. It's like you don't gotta
Yeah.
just let the
Just keep
numbers
it
do their
keep it
thing. But
simple. Yeah.
yeah, little tweaks here and
The
there. So
Falcons have an awesome color scheme, black and red. You can't really hate on that. Black, red,
yeah,
and
yeah.
white. The jerseys aren't bad. I like for me, I like the whole Deion Sanders Falcons. Those Falcons. Your
Yeah.
throwbacks are awesome. Like
Yeah,
the
they're
black
so
helmets
good.
and the
Yeah.
red helmets, they're both sick. So
Mhm.
it's really cool to see
Yeah.
that there.
Mhm.
Cool. Do you want to do a game prediction, or that's not really your style? It's up to you.
Yeah, I do game predictions. I think my last show, I think I was saying like 27-20 Washington is about what I think. I think it'll be within a score because that's sort of the Falcons style.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I really don't like the matchup on defense. But again, it's up to turnovers, like because that can flip everything. But yeah, I think on paper it's a tough one.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Kevin, honestly, you've been awesome. You're a fantastic guest. I really like jiving with you today. Great knowledge of topics. Can you plug everything? What kind of work? Where can they find you on social media? What products are you working on? What articles are you doing? Drop it on. Make it happen.
Yeah, yeah. You guys can follow me on Twitter at Falcoholic Kevin. Especially for pessimistic tweets during the game. Everybody loves those. And then my show is at Falcoholic Live and at Falcoholic Pod, also on Twitter, but it's available on YouTube. We do live shows on Wednesdays, Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, and then live post games as well. And then the podcast comes out multiple times a week, and that'll be on all the usual podcast platforms. And then the site, of course, is the Falcoholic on SB Nation for all that great written content. We have a great crew doing all kinds of tremendous stuff there. And of course, you can see my writing there as well. So yeah, awesome. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, George. Appreciate it.
Of course, no problem, bro. No problem at all. So guys, definitely, give Kevin a follow. Follow him on all social media platforms, on YouTube, so on and so forth. I'm George Carmi at Full Press Commanders. You guys can find my podcast on YouTube. You can also find it on all audio platforms as well. I write for fullpresscoverage.com. And have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Enjoy the game. Kevin, peace out, bro. See y'all later.
Yep.
Peace.
Thanks, guys.